Hello everyone, I'm the Unity Dude, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make an infinite scroll view in the Unity game engine. The final result will be as shown in the video. Before we begin, make sure to click the subscribe button below for more useful Unity tutorials. So let's get started. I have an empty scene with a UI canvas and a background image. Add a new scroll view to the canvas, which we will be working on. Delete both the scroll bars inside the scroll view and disable vertical scrolling. Let's change the size and the background of the scroll view. Next, add a horizontal layout group to the content panel. Enable the width component of use child scale and set child alignment to middle left. After this, add a content size fitter and set its horizontal fit to preferred size. And now we can start adding items to the scroll view. I will add 3 items with an image in the background and a label in the foreground. For now, let's label the items A, B, and C so that it is easier to understand what's happening. Let's adjust the spacing and padding of the horizontal layout group. On the viewport, I will add a rectangle mask to make the corners of the scroll view look smoother. And our UI is now ready. This is what the scroll view should look like when we play the scene. Next, let's get started with the coding part. Add a new script to the scroll view, which I will call Infinite Scroll. Inside the script, the first thing we need is the UI library. After this, add all the reference variables we will require for this script. We will need a reference of the scroll rectangle, references for the rectangle transforms of viewport and the content panel, the horizontal layout group, and finally we need a rectangle transform list for all the items in the scroll view. Now the logic which we are going to implement is we are going to duplicate the items in the scroll view at the start and at the end of the content panel. And when the user scrolls past a specific limit, we are going to loop the position of the content panel backwards to make it look like an infinite scroll view. So let's first implement the logic for duplicating the required number of items. To calculate the number of required items, divide the length of the viewport by the total space required for a single item. The total space required for one item is the sum of its width and the layout group spacing. Use the ceiling function to round this value to the next highest integer. And now let's duplicate the specified number of items on the left and right of the scroll view. For adding items on the right, simply instantiate them from first to last and then set them as the last sibling. Do the opposite for adding items on the left. Add the items from last to first and then set them as the first sibling. Back to Unity, assign all the variables to the script and run the scene. Perfect. Our items are being duplicated in the correct sequence. The next thing we want to do is set the position of the content panel so that the original items are shown at the start of the scene. To do this, calculate the space taken up by the original items in the start of the content panel, and then set the position of the content panel to this value. Let's test the code. And perfect. The content panel is positioned in the center. And now we will implement the logic for looping the scroll view. If the X position of the content panel becomes larger than 0, calculate the space required for the original items and subtract this value from the position of the content panel to make it loop in the opposite direction. Make sure that you call the force update canvas function. For looping in the other direction, add the same value when the content panel reaches the last original item. And let's test the code. The content panel is now looping infinitely. However, sometimes there is a strange behavior in the velocity of the content panel. The behavior occurs because when we change the position of the content panel, it affects the velocity calculations. To fix this, we will need to ignore these calculations on the frame when we reset the position of the content panel. Create a vector tool for storing the velocity of the content panel. Also, create a boolean for checking when we reset the position of the content panel. Set these variables to 0 at start. And now, when we reset the position of the content panel, save the velocity of the content panel and set the boolean to true. And now, if we reset the position of the content panel in the last frame, we will ignore the velocity calculations by setting the velocity of the scroll view to the one we saved in the last frame. And we are all done. Let's run the scene to check if everything is working just as we want it to. Perfect. We now have an infinite scroll view in our Unity game. You can change the number of items in the scroll view or the size of the scroll view to any value, and it will always run as intended. That's it for adding an infinite scroll view in your Unity game. If you found this video helpful, make sure to hit the like button.